abroad. Call them at 866-224-5422. The AmpSquare.tv library allows productions to be seen over and over again, making commercial platforms more usable. Call 866-224-5422. Toll free 866-224-5422. AMP2.tv, the first and only internet television network that's truly plugged in. 866-224-5422. That's AMP2.TV.
Now you can get Talk 1470 WNN on 95.3 FM too. Loud and clear. Health and Wealth Radio, WNN.
The opinions expressed on the following sponsored program are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. Are you a family caregiver? Are you caregiving for someone who can no longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teal. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on caregiversolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teal, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Caregiver Solutions Info. I'm so happy that you could join us because we have another wonderful program today for you. We are live from Boca Raton, Florida, and you can catch us live stream on caregiversolutions.info and in the South Florida viewing area on 1470 AM and 95.3 FM. So however you've joined us, I'm glad that you're here. Now, last week, if you were with us, you know that we talked about frontal temporal lobe dementia, and a daughter came and told her story about her mom. Well, this week, we're going to continue that conversation. As you may or may not realize, there are many different types of diseases that cause memory loss. And as caregivers, sometimes, you don't know, especially in the beginning, what exactly is going on. You just know that things aren't right. There's memory loss going on, but it's real important to get a true diagnosis and a correct diagnosis so that you know what is happening, what you can expect, and it's so important. And I can't tell you how many times I talk to caregivers. They'll say, well, my husband or my mom, they have dementia. And when I say, well, what kind of dementia? They look at me kind of funny, and they said that the doctor didn't say. So there's many, many different types of dementia caused by many different things. And, of course, the most common one, the most prevalent one is Alzheimer's disease. But there's also many others. There's vascular dementia caused when the brain is affected by stroke or, some injury to the brain. There's also this frontal temporal lobe dementia we're going to be talking about. There's lots of other types, and these are the kind of dementias that we know that are non-reversible. Now, there are some dementias that are pseudo-dementia or maybe reversible, and that can be caused by lots of different things, too. It can be caused by imbalance, a thyroid imbalance, or a vitamin deficiency, for instance. It can be caused by interactions of different medications. So that's why it's real important when you actually see or don't see things, but have a feeling that something isn't quite right, and you go to the doctor to get a diagnosis, make sure that you get a full workup. make sure that they do the blood tests, they do the paperwork, they do the labs, they do the MRIs or the PET scans, because it's important to figure out, first of all, what kind of dementia is it, and second of all, is it a reversible kind, which is something that obviously we would want to do, and that would be a good thing. And if it's not the reversible kind, obviously we want to know, well, what is it and what to expect. So we're continuing today with the discussion of FTD. Now with us on the telephone is someone who's in the arena of this particular type of disease, who is going to be sharing her knowledge with us. So joining me today is Sharon Denny. She's the program director of the Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration in Radnor, Pennsylvania. Sharon, are you on the phone? Hello, Sharon? She got disconnected. Okay, so we hope that she's calling back in, and that happens sometimes. So let's just see what we can get Sharon back on the phone with us today, because she is calling us from Radnor, Pennsylvania, and we want to see if she's with us. I think she is. Hi, Sharon, are you there?
I am, Marcia. How are you?
Hi, we lost you there for a moment, all the way up there in Pennsylvania.
I'm back, and it's good to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you for calling in. This is a wonderful opportunity to talk with you. You're the program director, again, for the Association of Frontotemporal Degeneration, all the way up there in Radnor, Pennsylvania. First of all, I want to ask you about your work there in Pennsylvania and what it is that your association actually does. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. So the Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration, or AFTD, is a nonprofit. We are a nationally recognized organization whose entire focus is on the frontotemporal degeneration disorders. So our mission is entirely about improving the quality of life of people who are affected by FTD and driving research to a cure. We do that through several different avenues. So while our mission is very focused on this set of disorders, we actually work across the spectrum in all the areas that affect the lives of the folks that are facing FTD. So we are involved in promoting and funding research. We do an awful lot of awareness, as you can imagine, to help people learn about and understand the different types of dementia, and this one in particular. We provide support and information to those who are directly impacted. We provide education to healthcare professionals who are learning more about FTD and how to serve the folks in their care. And we advocate for funding for research and advocate for changes in public policy that will improve the service system available to folks in the community.
Wow, that's a lot, and that's wonderful. Good work that you're doing there. Tell me, is it just in Pennsylvania that you have the services available, or is it national?
No, we are absolutely a national organization. You know, FTD, as I'm sure we'll talk about soon, is not as common as Alzheimer's. So as a result, we try to use our donor dollars as wisely as we can. We don't have chapters. We don't support the infrastructure of chapters across the country, but we have a wonderful, growing, and vibrant network of volunteers and do an awful lot of networking across the country. We also have a network of caregiver support groups, now represented in, I think, 24 states or so. There are AFTD-affiliated support groups for caregivers who are facing this disorder. So we're very much a national organization, although we work out of one office here outside of Philadelphia.
Okay, great. Thank you for explaining that, because since you're in Pennsylvania, I know here in Florida, I don't have a chapter for FTD specifically, although, like you mentioned, there's support groups. So everybody that's listening today, anybody that hears the information certainly can contact you, and we'll later be giving out that information so they can also tap into your resources. So, yes, let's talk about this particular type, this disease. I mentioned in the beginning of the program that Alzheimer's disease is the most common and probably the most well-known type of dementia out there, but there's so many others. How prevalent is FTD?
Well, the best estimates are that FTD is probably composes about 5 to 10% of all dementias. But like so many things in our field, it's very, very hard to get accurate numbers. There's still challenges in accurately diagnosing FTD. And so as a result, we don't have good epidemiological data on how many people are affected. Within that big umbrella, though, we do know that FTD is the most common form of dementia in people under the age of 60.
Okay, so it really has a demographic group that is affected more than others, which is probably one of the front runner things to look for if someone that's younger is having these signs and symptoms that we're going to be talking about. Where it's funny because Alzheimer's disease, which is my passion and something that I've worked with for 17 years. Is usually thought of as being an old person's disease. But, with education and with what we know going forward with all the research and talking about it more and like you said, making people more aware, we do find that it is not just an old person's disease because Alzheimer's can strike people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and the more we talk about this, the more people will become aware. And so, last week we had a daughter who was on the show, and it just so happened that she talked about her mom, who was fairly young, had actually been diagnosed with FTD in her 60s, and now she's in her 70s, and told about the family situation. And later today in the program, we're going to be talking about a caregiver whose husband has FTD. So tell me about how, in layman's terms, how FTD differs, say, from Alzheimer's disease or from any other type of dementia. What are besides having it maybe strike at a younger age, what are some of the other distinguishing factors?
So there's really three main things that can help to differentiate FTD from Alzheimer's disease. The first is what we've mentioned, which is that on average it starts younger. So some of the data shows that if you're looking at folks who are 65, then Alzheimer's and FTD are about as prevalent in the population. Once you notch that down to 60, FTD is more prevalent. And so we do know that this is a younger onset form of dementia. Secondly, FTD is not primarily a memory disorder. So again, we think of Alzheimer's, we generally think of memory. There are certainly other symptoms that come into the picture, but FTD is not, the hallmark of FTD is not memory. The hallmark of FTD are changes in someone's personality, in their use of language, and in their movement and motor skills. So FTD is going to affect a person's decision-making, their ability to behave within social norms, their control of emotions. These are all things that are much more hallmark signs of FTD than they would be of Alzheimer's, especially early on. And then thirdly, we've also mentioned, so FTD is a relatively rare disease, and, again, of that 5 to 10% of the overall dementia population, the best estimate that we have is that about 50 to 60,000 people in the U.S. are diagnosed with FTD. So it starts younger. It's not primarily a memory disorder, and it's much less common than Alzheimer's.
But does it cause dementia ultimately?
Yes. Yes, so FTD is a progressive brain disease. It affects the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain. So again, the geography is different from Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's primarily affects the hippocampus.
Where the memory is stored.
Where the memory is stored, exactly. And so in FTD, the main parts of the brain that are affected are the frontal lobe, which is, just as it sounds, right in the front of the head, behind the forehead. And that's the seat of what we often call executive functioning, planning, organizing, decision-making, judgment, self-awareness. And then the temporal lobes, and the temporal lobes are much more involved in language production and in the interpretation of information coming in from the senses.
Yeah, so it could be pretty scary, I guess, for someone that's younger to be having some of these symptoms, because you talk about executive function. People are working in executive function with planning and executing plans and things like that, and all of a sudden they can't do it. I could just imagine someone younger that's working for a big company, and what would be the first thing someone would think of? It's like, hey man, are you on drugs or something? Because what's going on with you? So this is something that we definitely need to make more people aware of, because the other question I have for you, sometimes with Alzheimer's, it's in the family, and people have the familial gene that, but not necessarily. Is that something that is associated with FTD? Does it run in families, or it doesn't really have that vein?
So what we know actually is that about 10 to 20% of people with FTD have a family pattern of inheritance. Then there's another portion of the population, up to about 40%, where there may be some indicators of another type of progressive disorder or another type of neurological disorder in the family, but not necessarily FTD, so maybe Parkinson's or maybe ALS or maybe Alzheimer's. But still, on balance, right now, it looks like 60% of the cases of FTD don't have any family history. So it's a combination of things. And one of the things I think that's important to underscore is that FTD is not really one single disease. It's actually an umbrella unto itself of different diseases that affect these same parts of the brain, the frontal and temporal lobes. So much as you had said earlier, Marcia, that dementia is a very broad term with many forms of dementia, FTD itself is actually an umbrella term under which there are several different clinical presentations and several different pathologies that cause the difficulties that we see in the symptoms.
Wow, it's getting very tricky now, even for people that want to learn about it, because the more you learn, the more you don't know, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So with that, I'm going to let you explain that a little bit further after we take our first commercial break. I want to hear more about that, so everybody stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help, because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides.
Hi, I'm Michael Mole, owner of Senior Hope.
The inability to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's, particularly among the family members who care for them. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts.
CareGiverSolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
And And we're back, and with me today via telephone is Sharon Denny. Sharon is the program director for the Association of Frontotemporal Degeneration in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. And thank you, Sharon, for joining me today to talk about FTD.
Thank you, Marcia.
You mentioned before we went to commercial break that the umbrella that we normally talk about, if we're going to be talking about dementia in general, it's like an umbrella, but under the umbrella would be the different handles of the umbrella, and the largest handle would be Alzheimer's disease because it is the most prevalent. It's also usually the most well-known awareness-wise, but there's many other different types of dementia, one of them being this frontotemporal, you call it degeneration. We want to know why it's so different, because you mentioned that it has its own umbrella. Can you explain that just a little bit further?
Sure. This is a really complex group of disorders, and perhaps the easiest way to begin to think about it is when someone starts to experience difficulties in their daily life in thinking or in actions and being able to follow through. Those early symptoms are going to start very gradually. And as we mentioned earlier, they generally are not primarily memory, but they do fall into three broad categories. And so within that umbrella of FTD, we think of three main clinical presentations. So the symptoms that the doctor would see in the clinic could be grouped under really three different areas. One is called behavioral variant FTD, and this is where people show first the symptoms are early changes in behavior or personality or judgment or, as you're saying, executive functioning, that ability to plan and organize. So this one presentation of FTD has prominent and early changes in behavior or personality. These are folks who maybe lose interest in activities. They start to withdraw from things they always enjoyed doing. They may have more trouble getting to work on time. They show apathy. Apathy and that loss of interest is a very common early symptom. Sometimes it's hard to diagnose the difference between apathy with FTD and depression. And we can come back and talk about getting a diagnosis in a little while because that's a real challenge here. Mm-hmm. Also, one of the some of the other symptoms that go along with this behavioral presentation of FTD, this is where folks may have impulsive decision making or bad judgment. Somebody who has always been a very solid provider for the family may suddenly be making very bad financial decisions, or they buy 3 cars in the space of a year, or there's a real change in their ability to use good judgment. And yet it may not be clear to families early on what's happening. These are some changes that are reflective of problems in the frontal lobe. The other prominent feature of the behavioral type of FTD is some poor social decision-making. So inappropriate social behavior. Sometimes people, again, who've been very, very much able to parse how they present themselves when they're at work or when they're with family versus, maybe at the sporting event, and people who've never used bad language maybe become much more rude in the comments that they make, or people who are less aware of kind of personal distance and might come up and become much more invade somebody's space more, that there's some inappropriate social behavior that goes along with this particular type of FTD. So that's the behavioral variant of FTD. The second main presentation is something that's called primary progressive aphasia. People who are losing language or changes in their ability to speak or read. Sometimes people have a lot of trouble. They know exactly what they want to say, but they have trouble articulating it or getting the words out, and they may stutter or stammer. There's a number of different ways that language can be affected, but that temporal lobe connection, people who have difficulties in the temporal lobe may present first with changes in language. They have trouble finding words or trouble articulating. And that may indicate that the person's experiencing primary progressive aphasia, which is another type of FTD. And then thirdly, there are some forms of FTD that present first with changes in movement or balance or their control of their walking. And so there's a couple of related disorders that show up as movement disorders, and they are also considered under this umbrella of FTD.
Yeah, a lot of the things that you're talking about, we see an overlap. Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, and there's some overlap going in there, not necessarily the memory part, but a lot of the behaviors, the bad judgment, inappropriate social behavior, the aphasia. A lot of this you'll see even in an Alzheimer's, a person with Alzheimer's disease. You'll see the balance problem, the movement problem in a person that has Parkinson's disease. So a lot of this is interrelated. So of course, it's going to be very difficult to get a good diagnosis, a proper diagnosis, and it's even more difficult for families probably to figure out, what's going on and how this all is affecting not only the person they love that has it, but the whole family. Which brings me to caregiving. Because caregiving is hard, and caregiving is something that people don't even think they're going to have to end up doing until it's usually just thrust upon them. And we have with us via telephone a caregiver. And Sharon, you know this caregiver. You've had contact with her, and even though she lives in, I believe it's Iowa, she's joining us today. And I'm going to let you, Sharon, introduce our next guest. Would you do that for me, please?
Oh, I'd be delighted. Thank you. Yes, it's really a great pleasure for us to have Deb Nash with us today. One of the things that's, I think, unique about, certainly drives our organization is that we really very much are responding to and learning from and completely share the mission with folks like Deb who are living with this disease. So Deb's husband is diagnosed with FTD. Increasingly, it's important for us to make sure that folks are partnering with us through all parts of our mission. And Deb has done that beautifully, both in sharing her experience as a caregiver and helping to raise awareness, but she's also one of our lead volunteers. And so one of the ways that we have a presence across the country is through folks like Deb, who is a regional coordinator volunteer with us and helps us to have a presence in different parts of the country. So Deb, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Hi, Deb.
Hello there.
Thank you for calling in all the way from Iowa.
Yes.
Well, this disease and all these diseases, they're just not local to where we live. They're everywhere. And so this is why it's so important for all of us to join forces and share our experiences and share our knowledge. And I appreciate so much that you are willing to do that for us today, because I know it's difficult and it's personal, but the fact that you're willing to open up your heart and share to educate others is very honorable, and I thank you so much for doing that.
Absolutely.
So tell me about your story. What was life like before FTD? Now, so your husband, right? That you're the caregiver for your husband?
Yep, I'm a caregiver for my husband. Actually, we were a young family, and he was a very amazing mechanic. He actually owned his own repair business, and he was a business over 3 full-time employees. After about 5 years of owning the business, from 2003 to 2008, I noticed a change in him, a personality change that was just not his normal self. And I can say that because we actually went to high school together, we were high school sweethearts, and we got married out of school. So I've known him for so many years that when I started seeing these changes, I knew something just was not right.
Well, what was his personality like before? Since you know him so well, you grew up with him for the most part. What was his personality like? What kind of person, was he back then?
He liked to have fun. He giggled. He loved to work on cars. He loved demolition derbies. He was just a seeker of things to do. And he was outgoing, and he loved his children so very much. I saw that there was a change in just kind of him being more to himself, not interested in working on cars, not interested in doing his hobbies anymore, and he would just kind of be quiet and just reserved. And at first, I thought maybe it was depression and those types of things. And so then we would go to physicians and try and get some diagnoses and stuff. And they, at that time, thought it was depression. And so at that point, we decided that maybe the stress of the business was causing to have all this happen. And so we decided to close the business, and he got a job in a factory, thinking that maybe just punching the clock 8 to 5 would help him and be able to just kind of get him back into happiness again. And it seemed to, we thought, help, but as the years went on, it just kept on getting worse and worse.
So was he aware of his own changes?
Yeah, in the middle of the disease, I would say he was definitely aware. He had just questioning things of why things were happening, and then he would get delusional and paranoid. And he knew in his mind that that was not right, but he could not help it from it coming forward and him getting nervous and scared.
Mm-hmm. So when he had his own business and he had the employees, what were some of the first telltale signs in the work arena that came about?
I guess being short with the employees that he would never really be short with. Also, there would be cars to be done, but in his mind, he thought he could work on like his derby car, his hobby type thing, and not work on the customer car. And I didn't understand, what are you doing? You need to do the customer first and then do other things. So he just didn't have the rational to know that, no, the car comes first that needs to be repaired, not the hobby.
Yeah, I couldn't figure out priorities, it sounds like. Yeah, so those were some of the problems that were causing when he owned the business, and certainly stress, you would think would be one of the factors. But yet when you relieved a lot of the stress that you thought was there by him going to work for another company, like you say, just punching a time clock, that didn't really take away any of those symptoms, did it?
No. Mm-mm.
And at home, when he was, kind of not interested in doing things like you said, when you asked him what was wrong, could he tell you?
No, because I don't think with behavioral FTD, they actually know that they have changed. I think that it becomes part of their daily routine, and they think that everything's fine. They don't realize that they haven't tried to be part of the family or haven't done what they usually do, and have hobbies. And then I was trying, as a caregiver at that young of an age, trying to hide it from family and friends, because when you're in your 20s and 30s, you want people to think you have the perfect marriage, and so I would do anything and everything I could to make our family situation was happy.
So when this was happening, Deb, how old was your husband then?
He started changing at the age of 38.
38. Wow. Mm-hmm. That's super young.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be back with Deb and hear more of her story. So we'll be right back.
Wandering is a common problem for people with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's also a problem for family members who care for them. Keeping them safe and secure means never letting your guard down. And even though deep down you know it's time, it hurts to have to ask for help. But it could hurt them even more if you didn't. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts. Being unable to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's or related dementias, even among their caregivers. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know. We understand. We can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines. The inability to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's.
Info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
We're back, and at this time, I'd like to thank our national sponsor, Arden Courts Memory Care Communities. Arden Courts provides memory care for people with all different types of dementia, and they have about 50 communities located across the United States. One of the things that Arden Courts likes to do is to help provide resources for caregivers. And one of the things that they're offering is this book. It's called the 36-Hour Day Book. It is a family guide to caring for people who have Alzheimer's disease, related dementia, and memory loss. This is an excellent resource, and it can be yours just for the asking. All you have to do is call Arden Courts on their toll-free number. Tell them that you heard about this offer on the Caregiver Solution Info program, and they'll be happy to mail a copy right to you. So get a pen and write down 888-478-2410. That number again is 888-478-2410, and get your copy of the 36-Hour Day Book. It's a wonderful resource. So on the phone with me today, we have two guests. We have Sharon Denny with the Association of Frontotemporal Degeneration in Pennsylvania, and we also have Deb Nash, who is a caregiver for her husband in Iowa, who was diagnosed with the disease starting in his 30s. So, Deb, you were telling me before break that doctors, when you started going to see what was going on, they thought it was depression. So obviously they probably gave him some kind of medication to help with that. But what happened? Did it work? And if it didn't, what did you do next?
He was on and off medications, and, it takes a while, 2 weeks for that medicine to work, and then if that one didn't work, another 2 weeks for a different medicine, and then adding more medicines on top of medicines, trying to reverse. And it's just a long process. We go into now 2012, and he knew he was sick. I was at the point of having to call him to wake him up because I worked full time. He got a second shift job, and so I'd call to make sure he got up in the morning. I'd make sure he ate. I'd make sure he got ready for work, and then I'd also have to make sure that he left for work. So, in a typical day, I had to give him just the clues of what you need to do next, what you need to do next. I'm lucky enough that he did go to his job, but I'm sure he didn't do the best at that job, and they had to keep on giving him reminders there, too. And then he did end up losing that job also.
Because of poor performance, right?
Exactly, and there's nothing you can do. I mean, he was trying so hard to be functionable, but he just couldn't get it to work,
So now look, it's not depression. The medicines aren't working. You had to keep going to doctors trying to figure out what was going on?
Finally, in 2012, I put my hands in the air. He actually tried to hurt himself because I know he knew he was so sick and he just didn't know what to do anymore. So I took him up to Rochester, and they actually said that he had severe depression, and they kept him in their behavioral unit for about 2 months, and they actually did ECT treatments on him.
Wow.
So that is another step that we took. That I'm at that point in our lives, you agree to the ECT because they say that's going to help the severe depression, is what they've diagnosed him with. Now, I don't know if that sped up the process of where he's at now because of that, but that was the choice that we had. I made him make the choice because I was not going to be the one to make that choice. That's the choice he had to make if he wanted to.
Well, at this point, you're kind of desperate to know what's going on.
Absolutely, and you're ready to just try anything to get him just be able to function again.
So then what happened?
He got out of the hospital, and then we did end up getting another job. It seemed like it kind of rebooted his head, or rebooted the computer work in your brain. And he did get a job back into the automotive field as being like a parts guy and a service writer type thing. But again, he could only keep a job for about a year, and then he'd lose his job, and then he'd get another job in about a year. He could keep that job. Then finally, back in the end of 2014, I noticed, when you have to get unemployment papers and stuff and go on the computer, he would just sit and stare at the computer and not even know how to navigate. And I would get so upset, like, what is the problem? You know how to do this. But he just could not navigate to where he needed to go. And at that point, I'm like, okay, there is something definitely not right.
And so, again, more doctors?
More doctors, went back up to Rochester, and then at that point, Rochester, I did lots of research on the internet, I'll be honest with you. I Googled, I looked, I tried to figure out what was going on, and I came across Pick's disease, because Tommy had an ungodly thirst. He would carry around half liters of chocolate milk, thinking that's normal, that you can just have that half gallon of chocolate milk all day and drink out of the same container. Just odd things. And then sweets. He loved sweets. He would hide the sweets from the kids in our bedroom. He was so afraid that somebody was going to take his sweets. And so I would Google, and I found the found the disease of Pick's disease, and I kept on clicking everything that was happening, that's what Tommy was acting like. And so then I presented that to Mayo Clinic, and then they started looking into it for me more.
Wow, so you had to, you're such an advocate and so, thirsty for information and for what's going on that, if it sounds like if you didn't do all of this research on your own and present all of the details and what you thought might be happening to the professionals, that maybe he would not have been properly diagnosed.
Oh, I believe that, definitely. They would have just kept on saying it's depression, And so finally I got a doctor to listen to me, and then so that was amazing. And then after that, we had appointments in Rochester. We did the MRI scan. The MRI scan was normal. His brain is still full, and so that's odd that his brain hasn't started to shrink. But his PET scans, that's where it came and showed up at. He has, it lights up in the frontal area, and also his motor cortex areas where we get some lighting up, so that means those are abnormal areas.
And so with that PET scan, they finally determined that what was the actual cause of all of these, issues that he was having. And how did you feel about when you finally got a diagnosis, a proper diagnosis?
I was just finally, I had answers. I had answers to why this was happening, and that just to have the answer makes a world of difference. That we can go on now, we can figure out what we need to do, and how I can help him, and how we can make the best life that we can for him.
And so, once you had the diagnosis, did you change anything? Did he change his work? Did he change anything at home? Did you get help? Did he need help? Once you had the diagnosis, how did that change your course of care?
Well, being as young as we were, the course of care is so different. There are not programs out here for the young FTD patients. I tried to get a hold of home health. I tried to get my insurance company to help me get somebody in the home with me, because I had to continue to work full time. But he couldn't be left home alone due to the fact of getting lost, or just not being able to get from point A to point B in a day, and I would get denied. And so it just got to a point that we also had a behavioral issue that happened, and so then it came to the point that he couldn't live with me anymore because we could not get the help that we needed inside the home.
Okay, so his behavior became intolerable at home?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. And so because of that, what did you have to do?
He actually had to be admitted into a nursing home in the memory care unit.
Wow.
It's the hardest thing anybody ever can do to somebody, but it's the right thing that we had to do. I mean, he was only, that was in 2015, so at 45 years old, he's living in a memory unit. And it's not the proper place for him, but in Iowa, northern Iowa, there's not many places for people, and nursing homes and facilities can deny people under the age of 60 that they don't want them into that nursing home because they have to do more activities for them and things in that nature. So there's a lot of, we got to get boots on the ground, talking to the government, talking to our local area and saying we have a huge gap in the middle age for helping these people.
Yeah, because, it's usually all Medicare driven with a lot of medical, of course, with assisted living and nursing home, it's different. Some of it's private pay, some of it is government subsidized. A lot of things to navigate, but a lot more challenges, like you say, when someone is not of that Medicare age. And I hear what you're saying, that, where do you go and who's going to help you? And it's a terrible situation. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as soon as we come back from our last commercial break. So stay with us.
The inability to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's, particularly among the family members who care for them. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts. Wandering is a common problem for people with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's also a problem for family members who care for them. Keeping them safe and secure means never letting your guard down. And even though deep down you know it's time, it hurts to have to ask for help. But it could hurt them even more if you didn't. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts. Being unable to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's or related dementias, even among their caregivers. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know. We understand. We can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines.
Or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
We're back, and our program today is about FTD. It's a degenerative disease in the brain. It causes a lot of behavior disturbances. It can cause a lot of imbalance issues. It causes bad judgment. We heard about all the negative things that this disease can do to somebody, especially younger people. And Sharon Denny, who's on the phone with us from Pennsylvania, is the program director for the Association of Frontal Temporal Degeneration, and also caregiver Deb Nash, joining us from Iowa, whose husband, who is only 46, began having symptoms of this type when he was in his 30s, and now he's 46 and living in a nursing home. I want to ask Sharon, who's been listening to Deb's story, is this typical, what we're hearing, Sharon, that Deb's telling us her story?
Yeah, sadly, it's very typical of the folks that we talk with every day on our helpline and that we interact with this disease. What Deb has described is really the distinct impact of FTD because of the younger age of onset for most people. It's a disease that's not well understood, so that journey to get a diagnosis, we know, takes longer. So in FTD, the average is about 3.6 years from the time somebody first starts to experience symptoms until they get a diagnosis of FTD. In Alzheimer's, it's usually about 2.5 years or less. So it takes longer. That journey that Deb described is pretty typical. Part of that's the lack of awareness about the different types of dementia. Part of it is that the symptoms do overlap with other things. They do overlap with psychiatric disorders, and so very often people go the route of receiving mental health treatment first. The advocacy that Deb described that you picked up on, Marcia, is so important because the doctors are not going to understand how these symptoms are different for the person unless they have the information and the history from the family. They don't have the context in which to understand the things that are changing, and that slows down the process. And then there's an isolation, too, that because friends and family very often don't understand, or they may not see the changes or the symptoms the same way, that the experience of having someone with this disease is much more isolating because people don't understand it and the services aren't there. Again, as Deb described, that's very common. That's sadly not just Iowa. But finding a good fit of services where they have a foundation in dementia care, but also specific knowledge about how these symptoms are different and how do you manage the behavioral symptoms is really important.
Yeah,
There's
you're
one
absolutely...
last thing. I know that we're going to run low on time, but I do want to make sure that we mention, too, that the economic impact. So Deb mentioned the need to figure out about jobs, that Tommy lost his job, she was still working. These are things that are distinct in this younger population, and we know now that the economic toll of FTD is higher than Alzheimer's. So AFTD funded a study that was just published in Neurology, in the journal Neurology, where we are able to document that the average cost to a family with someone who has FTD is about $120,000 a year. Mm-hmm. So the cost of residential care, the lost income, the difficulty finding services, the impact of some of the behaviors that we mentioned, it's about $120,000 a year. That is really roughly double the cost of Alzheimer's. So when dementia hits younger, because of the disruption to where the family would be developmentally otherwise, the financial cost for the family is higher, and then the financial cost for society is higher.
Yeah, that's double whammy there, because losing, an income. I know Deb worked and continued to work, but how hard is that to continue to work and be the caregiver and losing, half the household income at such a young age? The impact is tremendous, and there's nothing that right now someone can go and say, well, I have this, so this this is my resource specifically, and I'm going to do this, and this, because obviously every case is different, but the boots on the ground, like Deb said, making people aware, talking to your legislature, the elected officials, and making them aware. I know that here in South Florida, there's been major strides made with Alzheimer's disease by groups of caregivers going to Tallahassee, our state capital, and talking to those officials and telling their stories. And it has made a difference because they do come away with some monies, provided by the state for care and some research. So, same thing with FTD, with, all these other diseases, but, people hear about cancer, people hear about Alzheimer's, but then you get more specific, and, we need to be able to make this aware of people not to leave out these special populations. So thank you for bringing the economic side into it, Sharon. I appreciate that. Back to Deb. Your husband's 46 now. He's in a memory unit because that was the only place that you could find, to take care of him at this point. What's the hardest part for you right now, Deb?
Well, I was very blessed that for 2 years, Tommy was in a care facility that was only about 30 miles from my house and on my way to work. So I would get to go in and see him every morning and eat breakfast with him. And so I was still seeing him every day. But that facility is more geared for an older population. So in June, we were asked to leave that facility. So then I had to find a facility for him that would accept him. And now the only facility that would accept us is 3 hours away. So there again is another loss. That is no way for someone to have to live 3 hours away from your loved one that you're trying to take care of and work full-time and, have kids. And it's just a terrible thing. But hopefully in 6 months I'll be able to reapply for other places closer to us. But there's just not those facilities out there that can, specialize in FTD.
Wow, 3 hours. So that makes it really rough for the family. How old are your children?
I'm lucky. I have a 25-year-old son now and a 21-year-old daughter.
And how did it affect them in the early years when Dad was acting so strange?
My son, I think, had a little bit of a he didn't have it as bad. I don't know that, but he was already out of the house because he's 25. My daughter, she was in high school when things really started changing and really started picking up. And I'll tell you, I was trying to hide it from everybody, trying to hide it from her, and she was a senior in high school, and she was taking sociology. And she'd come home and say, Mom, something is just not right. I'm like, oh, Alyssa, it's just, midlife crisis. It's fine. Everything's going to be fine. I'm going to get you through high school, and then I'll start working on Dad, and we'll get things figured out. And so I was like so angry that she pointed it out to me, but I knew it. I knew it for years, but I was trying to hide it.
Yeah. If you had to do things over, would you be more open?
Absolutely. I will tell you that AFTD had saved my life, finding an organization that understands this, and I have other support group people now I can talk to, and we have support groups. I would go to Alzheimer's meetings and try and figure things out, but it's a different age group, and so in a different part of my life, I'm middle-aged trying to figure out the path to take, most Alzheimer's are already retired, so they can take care of their loved ones at home. I couldn't do that.
Right. Well, it's terrible, and we're almost out of time, but I want to go back to Sharon. Sharon, give us some resources. If someone is experiencing or heard something that we've talked about today that they want to know more about, or they want to reach out to your organization for help and resources, tell them how they can do that, please.
Absolutely. Thank you. I would say the easiest thing is to remember our site address, which is www.theaftd.org. So it's www.theaftd.org. That's really going to be a portal to a lot of information. It's also a portal. It's one way to reach our helpline, which, as I mentioned earlier, we have staff who will answer questions from anyone, whether it's a person with the disease, family members, or professionals. And the helpline can be reached either by email at info, I-N-F-O, at theaftd.org, or by our telephone number, which is a toll-free number. It's 866-507-7222. And then we'll have a staff person get back to you and provide an individual answer to any of the questions that come in that way. I'd also like to say, too, since Deb set it up so well, we do have a companion website, which is designed for children and teens.
Okay.
And that's AFTD Kids and Teens.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you, Sharon, for all your information and expertise. Thank you, Deb, for sharing your story. I wish the best to you and your family. We're out of time today. We could go on, but at least, I'm hoping that we got this information out to people that needed it and that can really learn from it. So thank you both so much for joining us today. And thank you all for joining, too. We'll be here same place, same time next week. Don't forget, in the meantime, give somebody a hug because they need it, and so do you. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teal. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more Caregiver Solutions. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its